I am Brad Keelor. He is Trevor Carey. Next up on Director's Cut, we get super meta. We talk about interviews during an interview. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, until I am relieved of my duties at GI, I sit down with a different Geo-Institute member who has stories to tell. Some of them are personal, some are professional, all of them are fun. 100%. As I've said before, if we could do more than 100%, we would, but it's not mathematically possible, so we do not attempt to do that. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this today, head over to geoinstitute.org, and there you will find out so many things, including that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and I always feel very strongly that you will, dear viewers, and today will be no different, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Now, coming to us from a far, far away place on the opposite coast from the palatial Keelor estate here in suburban Washington, D.C., from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where he is a faculty member at the University of British Columbia. It is Trevor Carey. Trevor, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me today, Brad. I'm excited to cross an international border with you today on digitally, and we can have a good chat.
I am looking forward to that as always. And we have 10 questions as always. 2 of them are the same as always. And we start with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
Well, I'll give you the short 45-second or 2.5-minute answer here. But I'm an assistant professor in the civil engineering department here at the University of British Columbia. And really, my job is about education. On the undergraduate side, I'm educating the undergrads in kind of the fundamentals of geotechnical engineering and kind of the basics, getting the feet underneath them. We then move kind of into the graduate side of understanding kind of graduate education, starting to get in those more complex, advanced geotechnical engineering courses, and really the things that maybe start to become more of an art form and less of a science. We start thinking about site investigation. And then through research, which is the education of myself, of really kind of bridging gaps of things that we don't know, or trying to kind of educate students on the process of research. So generally, my whole kind of approach to my job is research, and education as well. So educating people along the way. So and primarily, I work in the geotechnical earthquake engineering field.
So I heard that phrase process of research in there, and it's challenging to get for a lot of people. How do you help the students learn that beyond the obvious? Like, everybody has their teaching method and everybody has a way that they start out with. But there are some things that when you're going through it are just really difficult. I did not understand literature reviews. Like, I could not wrap my brain around that for whatever reason. How do you work with the students to help them get over stuff like that?
Well, a lot of times we're just trying to, help students answer a question. And a lot of times it seems basic, but there's a lot of challenges of that. Kind of, what is the research question we're after? How does the literature inform that? Has someone done something similar? What are the gaps we need to fill in some of our knowledge and our understanding of something? And then what tools do we have at our disposal, whether those be the kind of our numerical tools, our experimental lab tools, perhaps even centrifuge or large scale experiments. So kind of where are the things we don't know and how do we fill into that, and kind of walking through that process systematically, kind of, and a lot of this is then underpinned by the kind of fundamentals of kind of relying back onto those things.
That was excellent. And I have to say, we're about 4 minutes into the interview and the word centrifuge came up already. And that's pretty, for anybody affiliated with Davis, I feel like that's about par for the course. So we might get into that a little bit later on.
Good, good,
We
good.
have to talk about some fun stuff here. That's the meat and potatoes of Director's Cut. That's what the people are here for. And so, Trevor, your first fun question: what automatically opens on your computer at startup?
Oh, so this is a great question because I feel like it really gets at people. What's the important things for them at the beginning of the day? So I think I have the obvious one. I have Firefox, my web browser. It opens up, it takes me to Google. So that's kind of standard par for the course. But then I think my fun app is Spotify, and partly because you can get everything on Spotify. You can get all your music and your podcasts, and even have audiobooks. This is not a plug for Spotify, but I typically are listening to something on my phone on the way in, can come and open my computer when I get to campus, and I can continue on listening to that as I sit here at my computer today. So I think those are the two main apps that always seem to fire up all the time with my computer.
So, for fellow Spotify users out there, at the end of every year, you get this email and it's Spotify Wrapped, and you click on it and it tells you how long you've listened during the year, what you've listened to, what you listen to the most. Trevor, what is your reaction every year when you click that button and you look at your list?
Wow. It's a lot of shame and scaredness, partly because, you open this up and you're like, how many hours have I been listening to music? Like, that's a month. Like, you do the math in your head, you're like, that's a month over the year. There's only 12 months. When was I sleeping and doing other things? So there's some of that. And then you look at your artists and you're like, you know, I know that's what I listen to and I can't deny it, but I don't really want to share that with the world. I kind of want to hold that in, and maybe we'll move on to next year, and next year will be different. And it never is. It's always the same every year in terms of the amount I'm listening to, or just the artists that I have on that top 10 artist list, or along those lines.
And that share button is so tempting right there, so that you could tell
Yeah.
everybody. Now, there's apparently research that when you hit your early 40s, you look at your musical habits and you try to break them because you start feeling like you're old and that you listen to old stuff. I am 44, and I definitely do this because I look at most of the stuff I listen to, and almost without fail, the peak listening years for me were like 1992 to maybe like 2007. And so I try extra hard to listen to things that are outside of that sometimes, so I don't get in a rut. Do you do anything like this?
Not at the moment, but you kind of listen to everything across the board, of kind of, and it goes in phases, really, kind of like, oh, let's go back to that late 90s pop music, or the early 2000s, and that might be like the first quarter of the year, and then let's go to some classic hip hop or some classic rock, in the second quarter of the year. So it always seems to kind of to change throughout the year, which I guess makes the wrap really fun, because I'd be like, oh yeah, I can see that was with
That's true.
March through June, June through October, or something along those lines. But I haven't been about it. I've heard my music taste is described as very eclectic, opposed to just eclectic. So I don't know if that's a mark of pride or shame. I'm gonna go with pride at this point, because it's always good to be a little bit different and have kind of different tastes.
Trevor Carey, a Spotify man for all seasons. I like that. The third question in the interview is always the research question. And I was really excited when I heard what you wanted to talk about. The Cascadia subduction zone. Now, to a lot of people, this will either be some vague idea of this thing that exists off the Pacific coast of North America that could be really bad for everyone, or if you're an earthquake engineer, you probably know a lot about it. Trevor, tell us everything we need to know about the Cascadia subduction zone, why we should be terrified or why we should not be terrified, and what kind of work you're doing on it.
We'll start by we won't terrify you too much today. It's something to be aware of, but not be afraid of, I think, is the best way to describe it to family and friends. So for those of you that aren't on the West Coast, or the left coast, as some people say, we have the Cascadia subduction zone, which extends really from Vancouver Island all the way down to Mendocino, California. And as much as we try, geology does cross international borders. So this is a issue that is affecting both Canada and the United States, with Vancouver and Victoria, and then a lot of the cities along the west coast of the United States. And so the challenge with this, the Cascadia subduction zone, it can produce an earthquake very large, up to 9.0 or larger. And that's similar to the 2011 earthquake that we saw in Japan that caused the large, long earthquake followed by that tsunami. So we're really worried about that. And we have a good understanding when that last earthquake occurred. It was about late January 1700. There's been a lot of really good records in Japan about an orphan tsunami. There's some indigenous and First Nation accounts of the earthquake as well locally. And so we do have a good idea when it's occurred, but we're in that range of when it might start to occur again. And what I do and kind of the questions that I have about it are, how is this going to really affect our geo infrastructure, our soils, and our, that is found in kind of underneath our feet, maybe in our dams, supporting our houses or structures. And a lot of this stems from the fact that our understanding of liquefaction has been largely driven by maybe smaller magnitude California earthquakes. And they're a lot different than the ones we have here. And what I mean by that is, in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, the World Series event, that was a 6.9 earthquake, and that lasted about 25 seconds of shaking. It was still really damaging, caused a lot of damage. But the 2011 earthquake in Japan, which is similar to what we'd expect here, that was over 300 seconds of shaking. So 5 minutes of strong shaking. So what does that look like for liquefaction, some of the ground failure we might see? And do our understanding that has been largely developed from those California earthquakes, can we apply that here? That's the question. And one of the challenges in this topic is we're really working with an incomplete hand of cards. And that's because we haven't had a lot of these events in the past, thank goodness. We've only had about 5 earthquakes greater than 9.0 since the start of 1900. So we don't have a lot of ground motion records or perhaps case histories, but we're living and working in these communities that will be affected by this earthquake. So we really have to start making decisions, kind of coming back to that kind of research question that you asked earlier, Brad. We need to kind of think about the sound kind of process of, okay, well, here's the unknowns, here's what we're trying to solve, and here's how we build for that.
Can you talk a little bit, though, about how we learn from prehistoric's not the right word because it's obviously not prehistoric, but I think in this case it's probably like maybe even 1990 quakes. Like I was think about the Good Friday quake in 1964, for example. I know we're still learning about that today, even though most of the impacts were on relatively isolated, lightly populated areas. How do you learn from that and apply those lessons to today, especially when that information is coming so piecemeal?
That's exactly right. So a lot of this is piecemeal, and over the last, several decades, if not further, we've gotten better about kind of documenting the effects of these earthquakes, whether that be with seismometer stations or kind of going out with post-earthquake reconnaissance. And so those are the skills or the tools that we're using really to learn from these earthquakes. We go out afterwards. A lot of teams went out to Turkey to kind of investigate some of the damage they saw there in the 2023 quake in February and trying to understand what we see and can we bring that information back and can we learn from that? And it's not always really large damages that we're looking for. We're looking for things that do well. Kind of what didn't fail? What are the things we can learn from there? Is it our design practices, or perhaps things aren't nearly as bad as we thought they might be? So there's a lot of things we can really pull from these earthquakes and just getting boots on the ground and going to look at some of the damage that we might see or the lack thereof. And then back at the office, we can use a lot of the ground motions that we're recording from these events. We record many different ground motions, and we can use that information to really inform our numerical models or use that information in some of our analytical or empirical models as well.
We could terrify people a little bit, I guess. Do we have an idea how far the inundation went from the 1700 tsunami?
They have some records. There are some records in the Puget Sound of kind of the movement of sediments inland, and so we have a little bit of that kind of knowledge where that will be, and that's largely dependent kind of how fast the ground, the sea level, we rise from the sea level at those points. But we do have locations where that would be, and certainly we have good signage and building code requirements that we're not building in those tsunami zones, especially with our schools, fire stations, or police stations, because those are kind of the people that we want to protect, or those are the first responders that we'll need after these events.
Oh, good answer. I was just going to go with pretty dang far. This next question, the answer doesn't have to be an engineering problem or issue. I want to get that out of the way right away, but it could be. I gave you a lot of hard ones, Trevor, and I feel a little guilty about that. But to the viewer, this is great television, or YouTube, as it were. What unsolvable problem or issue frustrates you the most?
Well, I was thinking about this question, and I won't say it's unsolvable. I think we have a solution for it. It's just inertia is really hard to overcome. And as an earthquake engineer, we're always worrying about inertia. So, and I think this is kind of really the undergraduate civil engineering experience. And that's because we don't really have a whole lot of time to really dive into civil engineering concepts fully and for undergraduate students. And that's partly because the major's so diverse. I'm an earthquake engineer, and a lot of times for undergraduates, we're just trying to teach them fundamentals for making things that don't move. We don't want things to move. And then I throw that wrench in later on and saying, we're going to make things move on you. So I worry that we're not spending enough time on that. And I think one of the challenges across civil engineering is getting folks interested in just demystifying those unknown unknowns to students, kind of what's out there, what they can do, what research or what professions that they could be in. And, and I think there's a little bit of, we need to kind of change what we're looking at and thinking about in some of these fundamentals we're teaching students. I think back to like computer programming, where at one point that was a luxury to have the ability to do Python scripting or, something along those lines, some basic elementary programming. And now that's kind of becoming the expectation a lot of times. So we might need to update the fundamentals. We might need to then integrate that more fully into our coursework. I'm guilty of this. I don't have it integrated into the courses that I teach, but it's something that it needs to take kind of a shift overall, kind of saying we're moving to this different or this new environment, and we got to adapt to it and got to get students interested in some of these topics.
So as that body of knowledge swells and that list of courses that you have to take to get a CE degree, it grows and grows, how do you mitigate the other side where somebody takes an elective because they're a creative person and it impacts what they do in their civil program? How do you make sure that keeps happening, where there's this cross-pollination between disciplines and people can come up with stuff that they wouldn't have if they had been in engineering classes 100% of the time?
The non-engineering courses that they potentially to take, or kind of across the disciplines within civil engineering, is that either of those or both?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm thinking more outside, I guess. Like, I went to a Jesuit undergrad institution. We had 20 classes that we had to take, no matter what your major was, that were over here, 3 theology, 3 philosophy, 3 foreign language, and on and on and on. And I think it meant that you brought a lot of different experiences in when you got to your major. I guess the question is, how do we keep that from going away within engineering, and specifically civil?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think the reason we have those courses is to produce a well-rounded student that kind of has a broad a breadth of knowledge as well. And so, I think there's room within our current coursework to kind of adapt it to these changing technologies or these changing worlds, and be able to introduce kind of some more of the broad concepts on the undergraduate level without necessarily taking things away, or more importantly, not making the degree longer. I think that's a barrier for a lot of students, making that degree longer. We don't want to do that. We've pared that down, but kind of thinking back and revisiting the curriculum, is it well balanced between all the disciplines? And are we doing a good job of kind of conveying what's next beyond just the coursework that's in front of us? And whether that be even just a larger class toward the end of degrees where people have had those introductory classes where they can kind of see what's the application of these things moving forward. And a lot of times these applications are inter or multidisciplinary. They're not just confined to the one particular area that they have an interest in, but all of the realms of civil engineering.
Oh, that's good. In doing my research for this show, found out you're a runner. I think every runner, you just have these memories, right? These runs that stick with you throughout the years. What is your most memorable run?
Man, I like this question. So, this is a great one. There's so many memorable runs. I've been running continuously for about 20 years at this point. But there's some good ones. There's some not so good ones. There's ones that are uneventful, like yesterday afternoon, for example. But I think the one that really comes to mind to me, and this was when I was a little bit younger and I could recover a little bit faster, found that as I'm getting older,
or a lot faster. I know how that goes.
Yeah. I have a watch now that tells me that you need to recover for 72 hours. And I kind of laugh at it. And then, maybe I'll take a day off and I was like, well, it might be on to something. That 72 hours, that 48 that I actually took was really good opposed to my normal 24. So all the technology helping us these days. But I think my favorite run that I did when I was during my undergraduate times was in the southeastern corner of Oregon in a mountain range called the Steens. And this is a pretty remote location. It's like one of the least densely populated places in the lower 48. And you're way out there from any interstates or highways. And so I did this with a few friends, and it was a 28-mile day where we started at 9,000 feet for a tall person that lives primarily at sea level. That's a lot of altitude for me, and I realized during this day that I do get altitude sickness a little bit. But we started at 9,000 feet. We then descended about 1.5 miles, going down 2,500 feet, out one canyon for 6 miles, back in another finger canyon for another 6 miles. Climbed back out that 2,500 feet, and then had a 7-mile run back to camp. So, it was one of these things. The night before, it looked like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's it's only 28 miles. It's fine. And then, as you climbed out of that canyon, as you're looking at the road, the gravel road to run back to camp, you're like, I've made a huge mistake. I can't call Uber. I'll get back. I could walk back. It's not that far. It's not that long, but you're really tired, and you just kind of want to lie down and kind of not do anything for a little while. And so that was probably the most memorable one, consisting of multiple peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Cliff bars and gallons of water drank on that trip.
And we talked a little bit about this before the interview, and you have hiked that as well at some point?
Yeah, I hiked that last summer.
What is different about it when you hike? I mean, I think for me, it's that you just see different things. Like, you have a greater willingness to stop and look at stuff. It really changes your perspective because you're not just focused on, I'm 3 miles away from the finish or whatever. So how different was it for you?
It was a lot different. Yeah. So I hiked it last summer, and even that was tough. And I was like, wow, I did this running. I'm not sure why. Again, a lot of questions about this judgment at this time. What I find about hiking is you're about the journey is the process. You're walking through things, you're looking around, you're stopping to look at the streams and the grass, and you're kind of really kind of thinking and pulling everything in. The one downside about running, especially that type of running, I'm very destination focused. I'm looking at where's the end, where are we getting to, what's the goal, and especially as you get tired, it kind of seems like the walls start to close in a little bit, where you're really starting to get tunnel vision of kind of like, okay, just got to keep going down this trail for another few miles, back out, back down the road. And so that tends to be more about kind of the destination and less about the journey. So I definitely pull different things out when I do these trips of kind of, running things. I tend to kind of go quick and thinking about kind of what's the long-term goal of this, whereas hiking, it's kind of stopping and slowing down and some points actually smelling the flowers a little bit.
And I think you appreciate that more as you age too. My daughter is my hiking buddy, and she's 14 now, and it's already gotten better for her. Whereas when she was 7 or 8, there was a lot of not "Are we there yet?" but like, "How many miles have we gone? Like, how much is left?" And now that's less and less and less. So I think you just get a better appreciation as you age, even when you're a kid.
Yep.
The other question we ask everybody when they come on Director's Cut is, how did you first get involved in ASCE and GI?
Well, I think if for the listeners, I've gotten to this point. I went to my first GI conference in 2016 in Phoenix, and if the listeners listened to Professor Diane Moog's talk a few weeks ago, I was in one of those vans of Davis students that road trip from UC Davis all the way to Phoenix on one fateful Valentine's Day in 2016. And so that was my first introduction to the GI Institute. And I guess it was a Geostructures Congress at that time. And then, as Diane mentioned, we did a short jog back through the Hoover Dam in Las Vegas, back to UC Davis. Don't look at the map and kind of, is that even on the way? We don't necessarily need to get into that aspects, but it was a good trip with good people, and it was a good first experience to me, seeing the GI Institute and seeing really what everyone's doing. It helped as a student, especially in their second year or third year at that point, really kind of what's out there and what information and what topics that others are researching that are kind of in line with my research, but then also things I haven't actually seen before, which I found really fun and really interesting.
So Diane also mentioned that there was a Britney Spears concert. I believe this was during her residency in Vegas? Was that the thing then?
Yes.
And that the people were split on whether to go to the Hoover Dam or to the Britney concert. Or I'm guessing there were some people who wanted to do both. Which side of this debate did you fall on?
I fell on Team Britney on this one. I'll own that. This might give you some better clues to what my Spotify rap looks like. So we don't have to go too far into the details there, but what I'll say is the Hoover Dam will hopefully be there for decades, hundreds of years to come. Britney only had a really short residency. So we're kind of looking at this like an opportunity cost of what do I have to do instead? So I was on Team Britney with Diane and a few other folks.
Those were such wise words, Trevor. I really you gotta play the long game, as it were. Sometimes we ask mentoring questions on Director's Cut, and this episode is no exception. We've worded it a little bit differently here to make you think about it a little bit differently. What person who has helped shape your career can you not thank enough?
Boy, that's a good question, and I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and partly just when you transition from a student to a postdoc to being in charge of students, you start to think like, what are the things you really draw on and what things you find interesting? And one thing I'll mention is I think there's a lot of people in all of our careers that have really profound impacts. It really takes a village for us to get here at this point. And even little things along the way have been immensely helpful for my career, whether that be my time at Oregon State with working with Andre Barbosa, Ben Mason, and Michael Scott, or at UC Davis during my PhD and postdoc with kind of help from Katerina Ziotopulu, Ross Boulanger, or my postdoc advisor, Jason DeYoung. So those have been really helpful. But I think really the person that I look to the most is Professor Bruce Cutter, who was my PhD advisor at UC Davis. And I learned a really strong set of technical skills from Bruce, but the things I look back, and I can't thank him for enough for instilling into me, is really the curiosity to keep working on a project and start to question some of the norms. Just because someone's done it and published it, is there a way that we could think about this better? And kind of that commitment to working on a topic and grinding through it and having a lot of time on task. And Bruce, I can't thank him enough for instilling with this to me, because he focused in on the kind of the important parts of the research and kind of what's the question we're trying to answer? What are the tools that we have? Do we not have the tools? Let's create new tools. And that was something that I found really fun to do, and I really enjoy still at this point of, okay, what are we trying to answer, and how can we create something to help us answer those questions? And so I can't thank Bruce enough for all of that help. and all of his time and his commitment. And one of the things that I realized his commitment was he retired in the middle of my PhD, but that didn't really change anything. He was still out in the lab at 7 p.m. with me, helping kind of build centrifuge models, or we were still mixing sand in the late June afternoon. That's a story for a different time, of mixing sand in a cement mixer for the LEAP project at the centrifuge when it was very warm outside. And he was always still involved with that, and I look back on that and the commitment to that, and kind of the curiosity, and something that I try to do every day with my research.
Oh, that's great. I know that was a Bruce story, but I always have to point out the single most mentioned individual in Director's Cut history has to be Ross Boulanger. I think it's probably about every 6 episodes that his name comes up. And I won't say I don't know why, because that could be taken the wrong way. But Ross is the #1 Director's Cut name. But those are some great stories. And thank you for that. We have 3 questions left. The one we teased at the beginning was about interviews. I stumbled across, in doing the homework for this show, an interview that you did actually earlier this month with Global News in Canada about the Taiwan earthquake. And so I wondered, what's the most challenging aspect of giving interviews about your work?
Well, I've thought about this, and I think really the thing that I really try to emphasize is that science communication, and really that vernacular that folks can understand that aren't engineers, our grandmothers, as I like to say to my students. And that's really challenging to communicate that across. We all know within the Geo-Congress, when we're doing our presentations, that we know the technical terms, we know that. But when we're doing these interviews, it's not a matter of kind of showing how smart we are, what information or what background information that we know. Just by virtue of the news kind of reaching out and you being on those, you have some kind of knowledge that you can provide that. And so I find it really challenging about that is really that kind of science communication portion of it. And largely a lot of this has come back down to a course that I took at UC Davis. It was called Eco-Geomorphology course, which was a 10-week course on some of the geological, ecological, or engineering challenges in the Grand Canyon Basin. And at the end of the class, we had an optional field trip where we rafted down the Colorado. So, it's an optional field trip. It made for some fun times. And so the year that I did it, the research that we did and the projects were kind of being this focus of really scientific communication, of translating kind of research to policy and how to effectively communicate that to the public, and then also to decision makers. And as part of this trip, we had two pretty good decision makers with us. We had Sally Jewell, who was the former Secretary of Interior under Barack Obama. She was also the CEO of REI at one point. And then we have Jeff Keitlinger. At the time, he was the general manager for Metropolitan Water, which serves all of the water in LA Basin. And so that was, we were rafting basically on his water, a very good portion of his water that eventually would make it into the homes of Southern California residents. And so as part of this, we had to make presentations and kind of talk about things. And it wasn't how many technical terms can you drop in 10 minutes to make it very confusing for people, but how do you communicate that across to them, but also to folks that aren't engineers? We had ecologists or geologists. As an engineer, the things that I say may not be, even to those folks that have higher level degrees, may not be something they know because they don't talk about it on an everyday basis. So that's been the hardest part, is just how do we communicate the things across in easy to understand and digestible kind of aspects.
First of all, I love that trip was optional. Did anyone not opt to take the trip?
No, I don't tell anyone. I know we're recorded and somebody can refer to this, but it was largely seen for the students, was largely seen as a trip down the Colorado with a required course. So we kind of maybe spun that about 180 and kind of looked at it a little bit different.
So when you had to present, I mean, not everybody every day gets to present to a former cabinet official and or CEO, to use Sally's case there. Were you stressed out about it? I mean, how did you overcome this? Like, how did you approach this differently than you would have a technical presentation?
Definitely. And partly because they're versed in all of the information, if not even
Oh,
more
well,
than
that's
you,
true.
right? And so that's a really big challenge. And I think I was the first one to go on the trip. So the first night we stopped, and one of the faculty that was running the trip was like, "Are you ready to go?" And it's like, "Me today first? Okay." Um, I was like, "I guess here we go." And it's kind of coming back to those basics of trying to, what's the problem, how are you communicating it across, and using kind of terms and words that's easy to understand. What's the problem, what is the solution, what is the proposed solutions, and what are the challenges with that? And for me, it was really fun because at that time, that project was the Jeff Keitlinger had an idea of what that was, and he was actually able to gauge, and we actually had a group discussion as a larger group about it. And folks could offer up perspectives that had just heard about that as we sat there along the riverbank. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's also, when you're in good company, people aren't going to be too hard on you.
I think it's important that you said fun too, because that means that it must have gone pretty well. Because I feel like if people don't remember it fondly or think it was a good time, you probably didn't do that well, and it probably didn't go all that well. So that's a good sign. So when you're angling for that job as USGS director someday, you can use Sally as a reference. Pretty good. You have spent time, your last 3 stops here, Corvallis, Davis, Vancouver. Some contrast there. Most exciting nightlife out of the 3. Give us the.
This is a great question, but I'm going to preference, this is probably the most controversial question that you might be asking today. There's could be strong opinions in all of these, and so I'm gonna take the easy way out and kind of talk about why I liked all 3 of them, and not ruffle any feathers or get any people coming after me later on, especially friends that are like, "Well, you missed the big parts." So. Corvallis was the first home of undergraduate and master's degree, and there was just a lot of good times there. I really enjoy Corvallis because it's a college town situated on the Oregon Coast Range. I grew up in Oregon, so didn't grow up too far from Corvallis, and all of the eateries are kind of the locations that we used to frequent, talking about research and Friday beers at the microbreweries. And so I think Corvallis is my favorite, but it's partly maybe because of the experiences there with friends and colleagues and just the fun times. I really liked Davis as a Pacific Northwest kid, to be able to be outside on a patio in the evenings in May or June in shorts and a t-shirt. That was peak form for me. I will not understate that enough, how much I enjoyed that, and opposed to Oregon or even Vancouver right now, where you can have that, but you're wearing your giant down puffy, and you have oven mitts or gloves on, and you're like, it's great out here, and you're shivering because you're just sitting in a cold chair. So I really like that about Davis, and I think it had a lot of good outdoor spaces because of that. And I haven't been to Vancouver here too long, but some of the things I do really like about it so far is just diverse. It is an international city, but it's also a city with a lot of different groups represented, and kind of what that means is just there's a lot of really diverse kind of nightlife scenes, or just scenes in general, foods, and that has been really fun for me to discover those and just learn along the way. And those are things I didn't really get when I was in Corvallis or Davis, partly because they're just smaller college towns. And so moving to a larger city has really opened my eyes to a lot of that, and I've really enjoyed that so far.
Very diplomatic answer. I always say there are no right or wrong answers on Director's Cut, but that was the right answer. So good job. Everybody will be happy with that.
Good.
Sometimes we make you think back on Director's Cut, but for this one, for our final question today, we're going to make you think forward, Trevor. I picked 20 years. It's a very arbitrary date in the future. What is your greatest hope for the geotechnical community in the next 20 years?
That's a good question. Kind of, what are the grand challenges we face? And that's, there's all sorts of realms we go with that. But I think still changing, kind of our research for the changing world, and kind of trying to better understand what's happening with our natural and anthropogenic hazards. How is that affecting our communities? And really starting to answer some of those tough questions. And it's not going to be easy a lot of times, because there's things that we just can't foresee that happen, that we need to prepare for. So I look at that and kind of, can we answer those questions moving forward? And that means kind of maybe refining some of our analysis methods or design methods to kind of maybe be more precise to the loads that are being applied to our structures or our buildings or bridges or roads, so we don't have to over-design as much. But I think that also means using some of the new tools that are available to us. And I'm going to say tools very carefully, but we have these really strong machine learning tools that weren't really in the geotechnical scene 10 years ago. And that's something that we can use. It may not solve everything that we need in kind of bridging some of these grand challenges, but it will at least give us a leg up and kind of better ways to look at the data. And then finally, I think we need to start thinking about these things in geotechnical engineering as not just our project, but what does this look like on a larger multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary project? How does everything work together? And we are certainly doing this, but I think it will no longer need to be the exception and more need to be the norm moving forward. And that way, in 20 years, when someone goes back to YouTube and watches this video, they can say, well, yeah, we did those things, and we really started to look at that, because this now serves as a record of my prediction here moving forward.
I like that. And you mentioned that. That never occurred to me. How stupid is that? I sit here and I do these videos every week with people. We do all these live streams, and I'm like, whoa, somebody could come look at this in 20 years. But if nothing else, it's a great snapshot of where we were at a place in time, and perhaps your predictions will be fortuitous anyway. And thanks for your answers to all the other great questions. You survived. You made it through all 10, plus even the bonus. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and I always say you probably did, because click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know lovingly every time we post something to the YouTube channel. So Trevor, thank you again for doing this. This was fun.
Thank you for having me here today, Brad. I appreciate it.
And for all of our viewers, we will see you in 7 short days with another brand new episode of Director's Cut.